Okay, the next thing that we saw, which is obviously going to be in the global exam, is the Reformation and the Counter-Reformation. I didn't put too much in this review because I think that you know it so well because we've done so much work on it. But if you don't have anything clear, please go back and look at the longer version of the PowerPoint because you need to have this clear. Okay? The Reformation was a religious movement, and we're talking about 16th century, right? About 1517 in Germany, and it causes a division of Christianity into Catholics and Protestants. Now you need to have the terminology correct. They are both Christians, but you have Catholics and Protestants. The Protestants are the Lutherans, right, who follow Luther, and they're both Christians. I put in the outline that we did. You should have this in your copybook, completely filled out, right? And it gives you a very good idea of the differences, exactly what happened, just the facts, right? We worked a lot with arguments, but I want you to have the facts very clear. And I want you especially to remember the Reformation. The Counter-Reformation, which we didn't focus on as much in class because we talked more about the debate itself of the Protestant Reformation. But you have to remember that the Protestant Reformation didn't only affect Protestants, it affected the church as it evolved, right? There are lots of people in the church who agree with what Martin Luther was saying about corruption, for example, who wanted to change some things in the church, but didn't want to form a new church, right? Didn't want to divide. So what those people did was they were represented in a Counter-Reformation, which was the church's answer to Martin Luther's 95 Theses, his accusations about what was going on in the church, right? So what they did was they reaffirmed some of the church's doctrines, combated corruption, right? And had sort of new campaigns to make the church even better, right? Like the Jesuits. So I want you to make sure you review all those things quickly from your copybooks. And we'll move on. Okay. Super important from here is Renaissance architecture and art. Remember that we're seeing Renaissance as the artistic and scientific part of humanism in general. Humanism in general, you'll see, and there's a slide in here as well to remind you, is putting human beings at the center of the universe, right? Instead of having God as a center, you have humans as a center, right? Human life on Earth. So, a very short and easy definition of the Renaissance is that it was a rebirth, right? Renaissance is the French word for rebirth of classical culture, architecture, and art. And remember, when we say classical, we're referring specifically to ancient Greece and Rome, right? Okay, a couple key, you're going to need to know a couple key artists and their work, okay? So, any of the ones I've included here could be on the exam. We have both in the Vatican, right, we have Bramante, remember in English we would pronounce Bramante, right, with the Tempietro San Pietro, and the dome of the new St. Peter's, the famous St. Peter's that we learned about in the Protestant Reformation, where all this money that the church was collecting went to building, and this is a Renaissance-style dome by Michelangelo. Okay? And in sculpture, we have to remember, in general, that they use a lot of religious and mythological themes, and even portraits, which you'll remember are pictures of people. And it was characterized by the beauty and idealization of the figure. So we'll see many examples of that. One important one here is Ghiberti's Gates of Paradise, right, which is in Florence, which, although it's basically just a relief, which means it has very little depth, it creates the illusion of depth, right? You can see more pictures of it in the longer PowerPoint, but I just made this one really short. Okay, another super important work is David by Donatello. We have another version of David by Michelangelo, but remember this small, darker one is Donatello, and the big, really famous white one is Michelangelo. Donatello wanted to emphasize that David was the underdog. Remember we talked about the story of David and Goliath, and David is the weaker, or the seemingly weaker of the two rivals, right? And David represents Florence. Remember, because Florence is a small city-state that is full of intellectuals and artists, right? It's always fighting with Milan, Papal States, Naples, for control of Italy. Because remember, Italy was still divided. There was no Italy yet. It was all still divided into these city-states. So what happened? Goliath represents the stronger city-states. You can see a little bit here. You can see it better in the longer PowerPoint, where you have the helmet of Goliath with some of the flags of Milan, for example. And of course, David has triumphed over the stronger adversary. And remember, we have sprezzatura, which we call a studied carelessness is the official definition, but you'll remember, it's the way that they tend to pose the figures in Renaissance sculpture as artists do, right?